When the Second World War ended, the world seemed to breathe again, but not everyone who had fought in the shadows emerged into the light. The war had been won as much by guns and tanks as by secret codes, double agents, and clandestine missions run by men and women whose names were barely known at the time. Some of them received medals, others faded into quiet obscurity, and a few simply vanished. Their disappearances left behind whispers, rumors, and mysteries that still puzzle historians. The story of these missing Allied spies is one of the strangest legacies of the war. One of the most famous cases is that of Christina Skarbek, better known to the British as Christine Granville. She was a Polish aristocrat who worked for British intelligence, parachuting into occupied Europe, smuggling information, and saving the lives of fellow agents with her quick wit and daring. She was so good at her work that even hardened resistance fighters were in awe of her. When the war ended, though, things did not end happily. She was dismissed from her intelligence work, given little money, and found herself working odd jobs in London. In 1952, she was stabbed to death by a jealous admirer, but for years before that, rumors circulated that she might be silenced by someone who knew too much about her wartime exploits. Her murder was officially solved, but many still wonder whether it was truly a crime of passion or whether her shadowy past caught up with her. Even today, some insist there were parts of her story that never came to light, and that her wartime secrets may have played a role in her tragic end. Another mystery involves a man named Lionel Crabb, often called Buster Crabbe. He was a Royal Navy frogman and a diver who specialized in underwater reconnaissance. During the war, his missions included inspecting enemy ships, clearing mines, and developing new diving techniques. After the war, Crabb's skills were in high demand, and in 1956, when Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev visited Britain aboard a cruiser, Crabb was recruited to carry out a secret dive under the ship to study its propellers. He went into the water and never came back. Days later, a headless body in a diving suit was found in the area, but it could not be conclusively identified as his. The British government gave vague and contradictory explanations, fueling rumors that Crabb had either defected to the Soviets or been captured alive. To this day, the disappearance of Lionel Crabb remains one of Britain's greatest Cold War mysteries, but its roots were in his wartime espionage work, where his courage and skill in diving missions made him legendary. Then there was Richard Sorge, the German-born Soviet spy who worked undercover in Japan during the war. Sorge was technically on the Allied side because he spied for the Soviets, but his methods were his own. He posed as a German journalist, befriended German diplomats, and passed critical information to Moscow. It was Sorge who informed the Soviets that Japan had no intention of attacking the Soviet Union in 1941, allowing Stalin to move divisions from Siberia to defend Moscow against Hitler. He was eventually caught by the Japanese and executed in 1944. But after the war, strange rumors began to circulate that Sorge had not really died. Some claimed he had been secretly exchanged. Others said he lived on under a new identity in the Soviet Union. The official story is that he was hanged, but the fact that the Soviets were so slow to recognize his contributions only added to the mystery. Even decades later, books and documentaries still question whether Sorge really met his end on the gallows or whether the master spy slipped through history's cracks. The case of Raoul Wallenberg is perhaps the most haunting of all. He was a Swedish diplomat, not a traditional spy, but he worked hand in glove with Allied intelligence during the war. In Hungary, he issued fake passports and sheltered thousands of Jews from deportation to Nazi death camps. He was seen as a hero, and when the Red Army entered Budapest in 1945, Wallenberg was taken into custody, supposedly for questioning. He was never seen again. The Soviets later claimed he died in prison in 1947, but witnesses reported seeing him alive years later in Soviet labor camps. His disappearance became one of the great unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Was he executed by Stalin's orders? Did he waste away in the Gulag system? Or did he survive under a false identity, hidden away because he knew too much about wartime intelligence operations? Western governments pressed for answers for decades, but none ever came. Wallenberg's fate remains a symbol of both bravery and tragedy, a man who saved thousands but could not save himself. There were also lesser-known figures whose disappearances puzzled those who knew them. One such figure was Agent Zigzag, real name Eddie Chapman. He was a British double agent who pretended to work for the Germans while feeding information to MI5. Chapman was a crook before the war, a safecracker who made his living on the wrong side of the law. But the war turned him into an unlikely hero. After the war, Chapman vanished into the world of crime and rumors. Some claimed he fled to Africa under an assumed name. Others said he was working for British intelligence long after his official retirement. While Chapman later appeared in public interviews, there remain gaps in his story, missing years in which no one seems to know where he was or what he was doing. For a man who lived by deception, those blank spaces in his biography only feed the mystery. Virginia Hall, the American spy with a wooden leg, was one of the most remarkable figures of the war. She worked for both the British and American intelligence services, organizing resistance networks in France. The Gestapo called her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. After the war, she worked for the CIA, but largely disappeared from public view. Though she didn't vanish physically, she vanished from history for a time, her achievements overshadowed by those of men. Only recently has her story been rediscovered, but questions still linger about what she did in the years after the war. Did she continue running operations during the Cold War? Did she know things about Soviet infiltration of Western intelligence that were too sensitive to ever be revealed? Hall's life after the war is far quieter on paper, but given her skills and her passion, many suspect she was never truly out of the game. The disappearances of Allied spies after World War II often had less to do with vanishing into thin air and more to do with the complicated web of secrets and lies that espionage creates. Some were silenced by new Cold War realities, others became pawns in shifting alliances, and a few simply chose new lives away from the spotlight. Yet their stories remain compelling because they highlight how fragile victory was and how easily those who fought for freedom were discarded once peace returned. In many ways, the war never ended for them. The front lines simply moved underground, and the Cold War replaced the hot one. Old networks were reused, agents were recycled, and the skills learned in the 1940s were turned against new enemies. But secrecy has a price. It erases people, swallows them whole, and leaves their families and friends to wonder what really happened. For every name we know, there are dozens we never will. Men and women who risked everything only to disappear into silence. Even today, historians still debate files that remain classified, documents that might hold the truth about these vanished spies. Were they betrayed? Did they defect? Were they locked away because they knew too much? Each possibility adds another layer of intrigue. For the public, the fascination lies not only in what they did during the war, but in what became of them after. Mystery clings to them because secrecy was their profession, and in a strange way, their disappearances were the final act of the lives they chose. The war ended on paper in 1945, but for some, it never really ended at all. They carried the shadows with them, and in the end, the shadows claimed them. That is why the stories of Allied spies who disappeared are not just history but legend. They remind us that victory has its costs, that heroes are not always rewarded, and that sometimes the bravest lives end not with applause, but with silence.